Free agency is alive and well. We got Sam Darnold joining the Seattle Seahawks, Justin Fields to the Jets, Chris Godwin staying home, along with much, much more. We're here to break down all of that with some fantasy football reactions right now here on the Fantasy Life Show. NFL free agency taking over the news. The boys are buzzing and we got plenty to talk about. By we, of course, I mean myself, Ian Hartitz, and the one, the only Dwain, the Rock McFarland. Dwain, happy free agency.
Happy free agency, and just like Ian and I were sitting here in the pre-show and we were seeing all the nice new artwork that the team had done. First thing Ian noticed about that graphic you guys just saw was the hot dog. It's like dancing. Like that just tells you the state of mind Ian's in. He's excited. He's ready. He's pumped. Let's do it, Hartitz.
You know who else is excited? Actually, probably not Seahawks fans, Dwain. It's been a long 5 days or so for Kendall Valenzuela and the rest of the Seattle faithful. That said, they did get their guy, bringing in Sam Darnold on a 3-year, $100.5 million deal, includes $55 million guaranteed. So Geno Smith is out. DK Metcalf is out. We can get into some of those specifics here in a little bit. But just on the surface, Dwain, gotta give Seattle credit for getting, let's face it, the best quarterback available in this free agency class.
Yeah, I mean, and regardless of what we may have thought about moving on from Geno, they get younger at the position. I think the big question here really is, okay, what are they going to do with their offensive line? Ian, because that was the big challenge when you look at Geno Smith last year, how often he was pressured, even whenever he was under 2.5 seconds to throw, 233 pressures given up last year by the Seahawks. That's by far the most in the NFL. The Broncos were at like 98. So Bo Nix lived a very different life than Geno Smith. And the one question we have, Hartitz, is obviously whenever we look at Sam Darnold, we go back to his time with the Jets. They had offensive line problems. Whenever we talk about what he did under pressure, it was not good. And then we even saw that last year with the Vikings. So you got Kevin O'Connell, you got these great weapons around you. They're scheming everything. But whenever the pressure started to get to him, that was a real problem. So I think that's the next big thing. We really do need to see the Seahawks go out and address this offensive line. Obviously, they've got some extra draft picks now due to some of those other moves that you talked about. So maybe that is the plan there. But yes, they get younger at the position. You have a quarterback that threw for over 250 yards per game last year, showed that he had a ceiling that we hadn't previously seen. Dwain. Also going to need to do something with the weapons here, but this is huge for Jackson Smith and Jigba. Like, because just a day ago, we were sitting there wondering who's going to be throwing the ball to JSN. We had no clue. And now at least we know it is someone capable in Sam Darnold.
Again, for 2025 purposes, like, I don't know about you, Dwayne, I'm not exactly changing my ranks all that much for JSN, regardless of having Geno or Darnold under center. I think it's close to a wash in terms of what they can bring to the table just for this year. But as you kind of started with, again, having the younger option, Sam Darnold, on a reasonable deal. I mean, basically paying him what Baker Mayfield was making down there in Tampa, I do think is a win for the long term for Seattle. I know a lot of people believe that they were kind of blowing up and, tanking, which, again, just not really as realistic in the NFL as we see over in that beta sport basketball and everything. But at the end of the day, they apparently offered Geno Smith, a deal right around this amount, 40-45 million a year. Ends up being Darnold the one taking it. So yes, I think after this we can all dream that they're going to increase that offensive line. It really has been rough, Dwayne. I mean, we're talking about PFF's ranking 31st ranked group, and really a lot of times you can trace it to injuries or just underperformance. It's just a complete utter lack of investment in this group, and it's been this way for a while. Going into 2025, they're just 29th in terms of the amount of dollars invested into their offensive line. In the last 8 drafts combined, Dwayne, they've used one single top 50 pick on an offensive lineman. So again, hopefully they're not done addressing those big uglies up front, because as we saw in those final 2 games of the Sam Darnold experience, things still are capable of getting ugly when he's not giving, a nice pocket to step up into. So overall though, Dwayne, looking at Sam Darnold, finished last year as the QB9 in fantasy points per game. Pretty sure we're not going to be ranking him anywhere near that. Where do you sort of have him in your way too early ranks looking ahead to 2025?
Yeah, he'll be in that group of like pocket passers, that we like. We know he's not going to do a lot. He's done some things on the ground, but right, he's not going to be a guy that we know is going to scramble around a ton. I will say this, like, it would have been a lot nicer if you still had DK Metcalf or you had another weapon there. So I think that's another issue that we've got here. Let's see what happens with the draft, with the rest of free agency. See if the Seahawks go out to do something to add a wide receiver too. Now, we do have Clint Kubiak in town running the offense, so we know they're going to want to run the ball more. They're probably going to run more sets with tight ends and a fullback, not as much of the 3 wide receiver variety stuff. So I think that there's going to be an opportunity here, obviously, for another wide receiver to come step in. And there's some things that Clint Kubiak does schematically that can help folks out. So I know it didn't end up going well for the Saints at the end of the year, or really actually after the first few games, but everybody got hurt. I mean, we've talked about it before. I mean, Derek Carr actually had one of his better years that we've seen. That was with Clint Kubiak dialing up some of the same plays that we should see in Seattle. So I think Darnold, looking at it, he's going to be a guy that's going to be on a balanced offense. We still have questions. Doesn't have multiple playmakers. You're probably looking at like QB 20-ish. I think this is a decent downgrade from the number of weapons, right, that he had. Obviously, Justin Jefferson is an elite player in his own right, but you also had Addison, plus you had TJ Hawkinson coming back. So I think it is a downgrade for Darnold overall, even if he is successful in Seattle.
I'm with you. Right around that QB 20 line next to guys like Trevor Lawrence, CJ Stroud, Michael Penix, and the like. Similar archetypes, but yeah, it would be a lot cooler if we did have another nice wide receiver in that offense. Ted McMillan, perhaps someone who's been rumored to be falling down those ranks, really would be a nice fit for the Seahawks in round 1. We did briefly mention it, Dwayne, but Jackson Smith and Jigba shaking up as, one of the, I guess, better winners out of free agency. Again, DK Metcalf gone, Tyler Lockett released as expected. We are expecting at some point for them to bring in someone else. You can't just expect Jake Bobo, with all due respect to Jake Bobo, to be leading, the number 2 wide receiver argument in Seattle. But man, Dwayne, maybe you can name 10 wide receivers you'd rather have in fantasy over JSN in 2025, but not many more.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough, especially after DK exited. I mean, we're talking about a guy that from the time DK Metcalf got injured last year, which was week 7, which kind of opened things up for them to decide they were just going to center this offense more around JSN. Metcalf may have also been dealing with some injuries down the stretch that we don't necessarily know about, but he had a 27% target share. So the bottom line is, whenever they needed him to step up and take over the offense, he did. He averaged 17.7 fantasy points per game in a PPR format, gave us an 8.1 utilization score over that stretch. So when you look at JSN going into year 3, Ian, obviously going to be a centerpiece to the offense. I think they do need someone complimentary to kind of help, create some space for JSN. But like, would it surprise us if he had 28-30% target share this year? It really would not. And Darnold is the kind of guy that can go out there and he can throw with accuracy. The other thing that I would like to say is Geno made a lot of great throws where JSN, like as good as he was, wasn't necessarily wide open on a lot of those. A lot of the seam throws, the touchdown passes, those were Geno, just pure anticipation, making a nice window throw. Darnold will attempt those same kind of throws. We saw it last year in Minnesota. So they're stylistically really similar passers. So I think this was the best case scenario with Metcalf leaving, and now you get Darnold to be the replacement for Geno. I think this is huge for JSN, Ian, and he could very easily be a wide receiver 1 this season.
Darnold actually ranks slightly ahead of Geno in terms of next-gen stats, aggressiveness rating, which is, again, testing those tight window throws. So spot on there. And again, just kind of looking at the early wide receiver rankings, look, I think you can still have guys like Brian Thomas Jr., Neighbors, and even Drake London ahead of JSN. But after that, man, it does get close between him and guys like Lab McConkey, A.J. Brown, T. Higgins, and those sort of ballers. So again, plenty of time to figure out exactly where JSN is going to be in those ranks. But certainly, a dark horse, if not, honestly, one of the leaders probably to be projected for the most targets in 2025. Great news, obviously, for all you JSN truthers out there. Also, some great news for those of us still holding on to some Justin Fields bags, at least in fantasy land, because he is set up to be the QB1 for the Jets. Dwain signed a 2-year, $40 million deal with $30 million guaranteed, making Fields pretty much the cheapest, kind of a certified starter in the NFL at this point, but a certified starter nonetheless. So we can talk about some of the hiccups that Fields has had during his career, mostly with processing as a passer. But there's one thing this guy can do, Dwayne, it is score fantasy points in a hurry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's got that dual threat ability that we're looking for, the Konami code. Last year, 0.62 fantasy points per drop back. Like, that's way up there. Like, a lot of the pocket passers will be around 0.45, 0.50, maybe a 0.55 in a really good year. So 0.70 2 seasons ago in Chicago when he was still the starter. So this is a guy that can put up 20 and a half, 21 fantasy points per game really easily, Ian. It'll be interesting to see what the Jets do. We've got Davante Adams. We'll talk about that here in a minute leaving, but you still got Garrett Wilson sitting there. I know Alan Lazard also demanding a trade or wanting out, from the Jets, which is kind of funny. I don't know how you get to demand a trade when you're Alan Lazard, but when you look at Fields, like just because of what he can do on the ground and that ability alone makes him a potential top 12 quarterback. And if he does somehow start to put things together as a passer, which you can never say never. This guy was a high first-round pick. If he did manage to do that, I mean, we just talked about Sam Darnold. No one would have thought Sam Darnold was ever going to be a 250-yard per game passer, and look what happened last year. He was. So if you did see some strides forward from Justin Fields in that department, then you're talking about a guy that could potentially be a top 8, top 6. It may not always be pretty, but man, he really would have a chance to be a surprise performer in fantasy football next year. And it'll be interesting to see where does he land ADP wise, because I think there are a lot of people, Ian, that are just kind of done with Justin Fields. It's like, okay, I've been there, I've tried it, I've done it enough, I'm just out. But he gets this contract, they're clearly going to let him, play this year. Right. It would be, we'll see what they do in the draft, but it would be pretty wild at this point to think that he doesn't get to start all the games.
Tyrod Taylor, the QB2, but yeah, man, $30 million guaranteed across these 2 years. It would be shocking, unless we just see again an 0-10 start or something like that. Knock on wood, sorry, Jets fans. Fields should be the guy again with a fairly long leash, and given he's finished as the QB5, QB11, and QB8 in fantasy points per game these last 3 years, I'm with you, man. I think it's one of these situations though where we might get lucky in terms of him not carrying that top 12 ADP, but as soon as week 1 comes along and we start building those projections, it's going to be tough to keep him out of that conversation. So on the one hand, I get it if you want to compare him versus guys like Brock Purdy, Jordan Love, and Justin Herbert. We've seen each of them offer that kind of top 10 upside while being, again, just the more, I guess, safer, just more consistent pocket passer. But man, Fields versus guys like, Drake May, Dak Prescott, Tua, Anthony Richardson, I do think I prefer him at this point, again, from a pure fantasy perspective. And even, on that kind of Sam Darnold point, Dwayne, I think there's some similarities there as a passer. Honestly, I mean, you look at quarterbacks that hold the ball the longest in the NFL, you see Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, Sam Darnold, Lamar Jackson up there. When you look at kind of the highlights, before their breakout year, still waiting on it for Fields. I get it, but before Darnold's year, I mean, you would see when he does know where to go with the football, he can spin it just like Fields in some of those deeper shots he hit in Pittsburgh and even going back to the 2023 Chicago year as well. So, no, hey, Columbus, Ohio lifer here. Maybe I'm, viewing his career through, too scarred scarlet colored glasses, if you will. But, if you are going to bet on a sort of reclamation project, Dwayne, you want to do it on someone who has that innate talent. And man, if he can figure out where to go with the ball, which is a big if, I still believe, man.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can never say never on it. I don't put him in the same book as Darnold. Like when we saw Sam Darnold, damn Darnold. When we saw Sam, it's like the damn it Donald, Peyton Manning moment. Yeah. When you saw going back and looking at Sam Darnold, like he always had that accuracy, right? And he always had the ability to make those big throws. It was always just the turnover stuff, right? Then the crazy, plays that you're like, oh my God, Sam, like what are we doing here? And it would just change the complexion of an entire game. And you know how coaches are, like they're out on that, but he could always spin it. And I think that he was in a tier higher than Fields. Now, to say that Fields, can improve, like we've already seen it, he got up to a 65% completion rate last season. That was a career high for him. So he's definitely made strides forward from where he was as a rookie. It's just hard, like to project a big jump forward. We've got 3 out of the 4 years where he pretty much played as the starter for a big chunk of the games. Like he averaged 150 yards essentially passing per game. He had one year, which was the big year for DJ Moore, where he was a little bit closer to 200 yards per game. So for the sake of Garrett Wilson, Ian, we do hope that we see a little bit of a spike here from Mr. Justin Fields, because if you don't, like if we are still dealing with a guy that's going to throw for 150 yards per game, it's going to be really hard for Garrett Wilson to get on track, even if he's running around getting a 35-40% target share. That can still be tough if the ceiling to the passing game is that low.
Final point on Fields, again, just to reiterate sort of that Konami code upside, as Dwayne mentioned. Since 2014, we've had 31 quarterbacks rack up at least 100 rush attempts in a season. All but 3 of them, guys, did finish as a top 12 signal caller on a per game basis. 42% finished in the top 3, 65% finished in the top 6. So again, really, really hard to bust as long as these dual threat quarterbacks can keep their starting job, which again, seems like Fields will at least be able to do over the course of the next year or two. But sticking with Garrett Wilson now, Dwayne, on a scale from DJ Moore, who finished as the PPR wide receiver 6 in 2023, and George Pickens, who was the wide receiver 42 during the first 6 weeks of 2024, where are you leaning with Garrett Wilson in 2025?
Well, right now he's going wide receiver 16 and underdog. I expect that to go down. But like when you start to look at the wide receivers below him, like that's always the real test, right? Do you want to take Devonta Smith over Garrett Wilson? Like I could see that being close. Jamison Williams versus Garrett Wilson, could still see that being close. Zay Flowers versus Garrett Wilson, probably that's close. DK Metcalf versus, he's got his own issues. He's now got to deal with George Pickens, and we have quarterback questions in Pittsburgh. So while it's easy to say Garrett Wilson is going to tumble down, what the ADP as far as, where people are willing to take him, when you start to really look at the list of names below him, it gets tougher because you also got DJ Moore, Marvin Harrison, you got Mike Evans, all right there in that range. So I don't think he's going to fall that far, but I would say there's a big tier of guys there that are probably more low-end wide receiver 2s that could turn into wide receiver 3s. And I think that's definitely where Garrett Wilson falls. So if he had got the, kind of a better run out as far as quarterback with like a pure pocket passer kind of situation, like I could see us talking about Garrett Wilson still being a borderline wide receiver 1. I know it hasn't happened yet, but all the underlying data that we do lean into still says that he's a really good player, former early first round pick, has a lot of things really working in his favor. But with Justin Fields most likely, leading the team for the entirety of the 2025 season, it just makes it tough to see a big ceiling. I think he has to get really lucky in his run out to see a big ceiling. I think he can still be a low end wide receiver 2. It could be a bit of a bumpy road, though.
Seemed like he was on the verge of finally giving us some of that, more consistent wide receiver 1 upside. And then the Jets went ahead and traded for Davante Adams, made things a bit tougher down the stretch. So I'm with you again, just kind of, we still see a lot of dominoes fall in free agency and throughout the draft. So it's going to, make a big difference for guys like Lab McConkey and JSN, even like Drake London and those types. But as things stand right now, there's like kind of 9, 10 or so wide receivers who you feel really good about having in that wide receiver 1 conversation. But then I look at the wide receiver 12 or 13 and the guy who's wide receiver 21 or so, and all of a sudden I do think that could be, an extended tier of sorts. So we will see where Garrett falls, but yeah, man, if we get a chance as a low-end wide receiver 2, I do think he's going to be, again, one of these just favorites to honestly have a chance to lead the league in target share. We'll see just how pass-heavy that Jets offense is going to be, though. Likely going to have plenty of work again on the ground for Fields, Breece Hall, and whoever else they might add. But hey, Dwayne, maybe not the best, again, run out for Garrett Wilson, but for Chris Godwin, life is feeling pretty good. Signed a 3-year, $66 million deal, and apparently left almost $20 million on the table to return home to Tampa Bay. So once again, going to be Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin. No Liam Cohen, but I will say, in these sorts of situations where the offensive coordinator leaves, sometimes the next best thing you can hope for is for the team to promote from within, and that is what Tampa Bay did with Josh Grizzard. He was the team's pass game coordinator in 2024, was with the Dolphins from 2017 to 2023 before that. So overall, Dwain, again, Godwin back. We got to see how the recovery from the dislocated ankle goes. Tentatively, though, expect to be ready for week 1. And man, if he's anything like the guy we saw in the first 7 weeks of last season, certainly could once again be filling up the stat sheet.
Yeah, man, 19.7 fantasy points per game over those first 7 weeks. Dude had a 27% target share. So, yeah, he was on his way to having a potential career year. And we're talking about a guy that's had a couple of other really good ones mixed in over the course of his career. So, yeah, when we look at Godwin, I think this was the best case scenario, getting to come back here. I'm with you. I'm not that worried about the absence of Liam Cohen. I think when you look at it and you're the guy that's already been on the staff, why mess this up, man? Like, just put Chris Godwin back into the same situation that he was in last year. That's that's what Baker is. That's what Baker's in there asking for. And if you think about the way that he and Mike Evans complement each other, it just makes the most sense for him to play that role, for Evans to then go out and stretch the vertical boundary of the field, win the stuff against man coverage. So I think we will see Chris Godwin in a similar role. So as long as we don't have any setbacks with the injury, obviously them giving him this contract is a major vote of confidence. And it wasn't like the guy was coming back from a major knee surgery or anything. It was an ankle injury that ended up, putting him on ice for the rest of the year. Has had plenty of time, so I would assume that he is going to be looking pretty good to start the season. So yeah, this is really big for Chris Godwin, and it's big for the Bucs, man. This is big for Baker Mayfield. We loved him with Mike Evans, but you and I talked about Baker did have a fall off after he lost Chris Godwin last year, especially as far as just that every week in, week out, putting up those massive fantasy points that we saw early last season. You got two really good weapons, and then you had Cade Otton in as your third. You get the backs involved a little more. We had the emergence of Jalen McMillan. There's just a lot of options here for Baker Mayfield, but the main two being Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, and it makes things really tough on a defense when you have two guys that complement each other so well like those two do.
Reigning 4th ranked scoring offense. So again, should have plenty of meat on the bone to go around. Accordingly, I do think Evans and Godwin could again be that duo that puts up, simultaneous top 24 production at the position. Last year, as Dwain said, really was the Godwin show during the first 7 weeks of last year. Evans came on hot down the stretch, but man, during those first 7 weeks, only Jamar Chase scored more PPR points than Chris Godwin. So, Dwain, looking ahead again to 2025, though, Evans probably going to be going earlier in the fantasy ranks. So you got some adjusting to do with the way too early ADP, so I don't want to put too much stock in that. But when you start looking at, again, kind of that lower end wide receiver 2 range, that's where you start seeing the Devonta Smiths, the Jameson Williams of the world, guys that are sharing offenses with another quality wide receiver. It does seem like both Godwin and Evans are deserving of top 20-ish treatment. That's, I think people keep expecting Baker to almost turn back into a pumpkin, but we've got, 2 straight full regular seasons of evidence that he really has turned over a new leaf. And accordingly, man, priced as God forbid we get a chance to draft Godwin as a wide receiver 3, I think I'm going to be lining up to do that.
Yeah, I haven't done a ton of drafts, but I feel like I've drafted Chris Godwin in every single one of them. I did it in our, fantasy life draft where we did a mock draft a few weeks ago. Yeah. I just feel like he's been way too underpriced for the injury that he was dealing with. I know there was some uncertainty about where he might land. Obviously, there could have been a run out where you land on a team where you don't like the quarterback. There's 2 other good weapons, but that would have been about what I would have needed to see to have him at wide receiver 35, which is where he is right now in underdog. I think Chris Godwin is about to massively climb in ADP, especially if the injury news stays positive. Here are the guys in front of him, and I'm just going to go up the list. Jerry Jeudy, you're taking Godwin. George Pickens, you're taking Godwin. Cortland Sutton, they had a really good year, but I'm still taking Godwin. I've seen more big years from Godwin than I have Cortland.
That's Sutton, a bad ADP ages. Too, though. I like both those guys.
That is, I agree. I think that might be low as well. You got Jalen Waddle, you got Chris Olave, Jordan Addison, Rashee Rice, Davante Adams is too low. He's going to be moving up. Yeah. But Romo Dunze, DK Metcalf, all these guys, I think you can make an argument for Chris Godwin, and I think you probably hit the sweet spot, settling it in somewhere around wide receiver 19, 20-ish for Chris Godwin. But I think you could push him as high as 16 or 17. I could make a case why I would want to take Chris Godwin over DJ Moore. I could make a case for Chris Godwin over Marvin Harrison. And I think you also just really hit the nail on the head. There's a big tier here of guys where they all have some questions. And so Godwin's really, his only question at this point is the injury. And that seems to be tracking pretty well, given the money that they just paid him. So I feel like he's way too low right now, in my opinion, in ADP. So I think his ADP is going to move really quick.
Jalen McMillan looking more like a borderline wide receiver 4 at this point. I will give him some credit because we saw what happened last year when Godwin left the picture and he became someone who I know won a lot of people some money down the stretch with all those touchdowns, during the fantasy playoffs. But assuming, Dwain, we're going to have healthy Evans, healthy Godwin, you really going to be too far in on Jalen McMillan this year?
No, but I mean, we love the young talent. Like you said, he did show some things off. So he's a guy that, like, if you're especially playing best ball, where you could have some games where Evans misses, you have a couple games where Godwin's out, you get these 2 or 3 weeks where they suddenly become valuable. And I think the thing we do know about McMillan now is when he gets his opportunity like that, he's shown that he's good enough to come through. Now, he never did turn into a target hog or anything like that. So a lot of it was based on touchdowns. He's due for some regression in that department. But again, it's a year 2 player that they liked, in the draft last season. So yeah, I do like McMillan as a guy that probably lands more as a bench stash for you. I don't see him being someone that you're going to be comfortable having in your fantasy lineup, but he does fit the archetype of players we like to still draft, Ian, and have them sitting down there in the reserve section of the lineup. And you just don't know. You never know when you're going to be able to get to put him in the lineup, but it could be pretty good. And he showed us that he can come through.
Guys, we got more thoughts on Geno Smith, DK Metcalf, and much more right after a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. Who's scoring big in the NBA this season? You are, with all the new ways to get in on the action with my partners over at DraftKings Sportsbook. From monster slams to dishing the rock to cleaning the glass, get behind your favorite players and the prop bets you can make on DraftKings, the home of NBA player props. Here's something special for first timers. New DraftKings customers bet just $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. That's $5 for $150 in bonus bets instantly. Take it to the rack with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings app now and sign up using code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. We said it, Dwain, in the initial, Sam Darnold discussion, but the reason he's getting that Seahawks job is because Geno Smith was traded to the Las Vegas Raiders, reuniting with Pete Carroll in exchange for a 3rd-round pick. So the belief is that Geno will be signing an extension. We're somewhere in that 40 to 45 million range. Again, similar enough to what, again, we saw Darnold get in Seattle anyway. Interesting, the kind of thing, what made Geno's thought process go here. Maybe it was too many years playing behind that offensive line. Not exactly, guaranteed to get a huge upgrade in Las Vegas. So I do think the discussion here is less about Geno in Fantasyland because, let's face it, probably going to settle in more so as that mid to low end QB2 anyway. But more so, Dwain, I think the real news here is pretty good for Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers relative to the other quarterbacks that we were looking at potentially joining this offense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and Geno is a guy that can hit all layers of the field. In he can hit you with pinpoint accuracy underneath. He can hit the intermediate shots. We talked about him with JSN and how, honestly, some of JSN's best work didn't necessarily come because JSN wasn't bad, but Geno was dropping absolute freaking dimes on this guy, even though he was covered. So when you see that, and then what he was able to do in the deep game, obviously you've seen that with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett over the last few seasons. They didn't fall off as a lot of people really predicted. Once Russ moved on, that was a big concern, and it didn't really come to fruition. So yeah, Geno is a guy that can just hit all these different layers, and that just makes a defense have to, respect the entire field. And Ian, as a former linebacker that played college football, the more diverse your opponent is, and the more you don't know what's coming, it's just harder as a defender to be able to just be completely dialed in and be jumping routes and things like that. So I think Geno does a lot for them. And if you look at him just from a pure perspective of how many yards per game he's had, 252, 242, and 254 over the last 3 years, like that's really good. He's going to be good enough to support 2 target earners in this offense, which is what we need because you did name them, Brock Bowers as well as Jacoby Myers. We'll see what happens here with one of our favorite tight ends that hasn't really had a good run out with Michael Mayer. Hopefully he ends up getting traded to another team where he can get some playing time. But yeah, big news here for Brock Bowers as well as Jacoby Myers.
Again, not going to sit here and say that Geno's a top 5 quarterback. I've seen people actually try to make that argument on the old Twitter sphere the last couple of days. Kudos to you guys. Keep fighting a good fight, I guess. But he has ranked, again, first in completion percentage over expected over these last 3 years. I do think in large part because, Dwain, to your point, he does take these chances. Maybe he's honestly taken a few too many chances. That is why some of the interception totals have spiked, especially last year. But again, when you were playing inside that Seahawks offense, you didn't have a consistent run game. You're always under pressure. Sometimes that does necessitate your quarterback putting on that cape, trying to be Superman a bit more than you would, have you. So I think it was Stephen Ruiz at the Ringer, always writes great stuff over there. But he was talking about when Tom Brady actually broadcast one of Geno's games, and it was the bad one against the Bills. I think when they were actually getting killed, they lost 31-10 or so. But Brady was basically still hyping up Geno, basically pointing out that what do you expect him to do? He doesn't have a run game. He's always under pressure and all this. So it does seem like TB12, obviously, hey, just randomly ran to Matthew Stafford. Obviously, that was a pure coincidence. But beyond, hopefully running into Stafford, it does seem like Geno might have been second on the GOAT's wish list in the QB market. So he got his guy. Again, maybe not expecting super duper fireworks from Geno, but I do think, Dwayne, we're going to have a case to be made when we're looking at the Darnolds, the Genos, the Staffords, maybe the Aaron Rodgers. These guys are going to be probably ranked outside the top 20 quarterbacks in fantasy land. And we're going to have to say, is there that big of a difference between what Geno could do in Las Vegas or say a Jordan Love or Brock Purdy, who are probably going to be going, man, a good 6-7 rounds earlier in drafts?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. And it's a challenging situation, honestly, for fantasy players, because one or two of these pocket passers every year end up doing more. Last year was Baker, right? Baker was the one that you were getting late, and he suddenly stormed up and did really well last season. So it's really difficult to say who they are, but a good starting point, right, is looking at the weapons around them. And so when you got an emerging guy like Brock Bowers, who did amazing things as a rookie at the tight end position, and then Jacoby Myers, who's just really been underrated. If they were to add a third weapon that is really more of a field stretcher that could earn a few targets, I think that is where it could really unlock more for Geno, Ian, and we might want to start moving him up the ranks a little bit. But I think for now, probably in that range that you're talking about, in that 20-ish range, around the same spot that we just talked about for Darnold and some of these other pocket passers. But if you were to add another weapon, right, that could really open things up and give you some cheap, long touchdowns, that would be a nice thing for Geno.
Maybe Trey Tucker, a little bit of untapped potential there. But yes, please give us a better wide receiver too. Assuming right now Jacoby's still going to be hated on by the community. Honestly, Jacoby is almost turning into this generation's, I guess he played the same time, but almost Tyler Lockett-esque, Dwayne. We keep on ranking him, not we, but people out there rank him as this wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. And then what you do each and every year, turn in some borderline wide receiver 2 production. So feeling good about Jacoby Myers. Our whole Fantasy Life staff is going to have our ranks updated for you guys by the end of this week. Make sure you check that out, fantasylife.com.
Yeah, Jacoby is wide receiver 45 right now. I can guarantee you he's going to beat that. Guarantee. Money in the bank. I'm insulted as well. I mean, come on, guys. We at least got to get him in the wide receiver 3 territory. All right. Sorry.
Brock Bowers,
45, that surprised me.
It's insulting. It really is. Brock Bowers, the tight end 1. And honestly, again, when you add someone like Geno, really is, even tougher to argue with that, current second round price tag. Certainly going to be debating that plenty this offseason. But more big news that did break over the weekend, Dwayne, was another Seattle Seahawk, DK Metcalf, getting his trade request granted, not to a warm weather location like he hoped, though. Instead, he got sent to Pittsburgh. I'm sure he's okay with it, though, because it came with a 5-year, $150 million extension. Only Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, A.J. Brown, and our one true sun god now making more in annual earnings. So on the one hand, look, DK Metcalf, you can add him to all 32 offenses in the league, and I truly believe they are better with them. On the other hand, Dwayne, if you had to go ahead and look around the league and say, man, what would be a really bad spot for DK Metcalf to go if we did not want him to score fantasy points? Might be Pittsburgh. We don't know who the quarterback's going to be, but whoever it's going to be, probably not going to be throwing all that often under, Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith's offense. And we also got George Pickens on the other sideline, who, again, I don't think is going to necessarily work ahead of DK or anything like that. 150 million reasons why Metcalf should be the wide receiver 1. But again, it's enough target competition where despite all that money, I don't know that DK is even going to be ranked inside our top 24.
Yeah, I mean, look, you've got George Pickens on the opposite side. It'll be interesting to see, do they decide to move on from Pickens? It's not like that's been a great experience between Pickens and the team. They've all definitely had their challenges. So maybe they end up moving him. But right now, we've got 2 players that really do the same thing. I will tell you this, like on run blocking plays, I'll be interested in actually watching the Steelers if Pickens and DK really decide to like go after it. Can you imagine? I mean, these guys, like, they can pretty much demolish any single cornerback out there in the league. So that could be really fun. But to your point, we've got a run first offense with Arthur Smith. Let's see who they end up putting under center. Honestly, you're hoping for Aaron Rodgers right now, like, or Russell Wilson coming back. Like that's what you're hoping for. Neither one of those players were great last season, but it's going to be a team that wants to run the ball. It's going to be a team that's going to now have to split it up between two of these players that do really similar things. So I think it's kind of weird, to be honest. Like, and I'm not knocking DK Metcalf. It's like you said, you add DK Metcalf to any team, you probably make the team better. But this is a weird fit. Like if you've still got George Pickens there and you've just got a situation where there enough quality targets to go around. So ultimately, this is going to come down to who they sign as quarterback. I would be a little more excited about Aaron Rodgers than Russell Wilson. We saw Russell Wilson last year. He did some nice things, but I still feel like a potential ceiling would be better with Aaron Rodgers. Not saying it's going to happen. Notice I use the word potential ceiling with Aaron Rodgers. But I don't know, man. Arthur Smith is just like... he figures out a way all the time. And we've seen this so many times. And look, it's not like Arthur Smith has been faced with the challenge the 49ers faced the last 3 years, where it's like, oh my God, how do we get Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel and George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey the ball? It's like, no, how do we just get like one guy the ball? No, you can't. Like, and it's like, oh, we're going to have him with a 70% route participation. He did it with Bijan Robinson. He's done it, with Drake London. He's done it to his best players over and over. So when you add that factor in as well, there's just a lot here. There's a lot. I don't think DK Metcalf is a wide receiver 2 in fantasy next year. I think now he moves into that boom bust wide receiver 3 category. Pickens probably falls down to wide receiver 4. DK did get the money. Would it surprise me if Pickens actually outperformed Metcalf? No, it's in the range of outcomes. Like I said, they're similar players, but it's hard to get excited around either one of these guys. So what you're hoping for, Ian, and we never want to do this, is that either they start throwing the ball all the time, which probably going to happen, or one of them goes down and the other guy gets all the targets. And we saw that scenario play out last year for Pickens. It wasn't great. Like he had some good games, but it wasn't like he dominated for a long period of time.
I mean, we always point back to, okay, well, A.J. Brown put up some great numbers with Arthur Smith in Tennessee. That was with, like, literally the best efficiency in the league. I mean, that's kind of the line we have to walk here when we're hoping for a wide receiver to thrive in this environment, because so much of it is going to be, again, making the most out of those 5 or 6 targets, hopefully hauling in those 1 or 2 deep balls you're getting per game, because Lord knows you're not going to have those 10, 12 target opportunities that wide receivers usually, again, being paid with DK is, to get those points. So, end of the day, I do think you're right, man. He's going to be a boomer bust wide receiver 3, because honestly, that's what he's been for most of his career. It looked like he was going to take that big step forward. Year 2 finishes as the wide receiver 10. I still remember him, torching Stephon Gilmore in game 2. It seemed like we were looking at the next big thing at the wide receiver position. But since then, man, between wide receiver 22 and wide receiver 31, I believe 4 years running. So again, way too early ranks, but I'm looking at Metcalf, man, more so as my wide receiver 28, right there alongside Marvin Harrison Jr., who, yes, I'm much lower on the consensus, and Davante Smith. Meanwhile, Pickens, I think is more down there as wide receiver 38, next to guys like Jerry Jeudy and Jacoby Myers. Because, again, hopefully they get Rodgers or Russell Wilson, but Dwayne, there's still like 3 teams right now that need a quarterback between the Giants, the Titans, and the Steelers. One of them is going to get locked out, and if it's the Giants or Titans, like, okay, they have the draft pick, but God forbid the Steelers are left hanging, man. What are they going to do?
Yeah, if we don't end up with Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson back here, it gets really bad. Unless they somehow are able to make a move up in the draft, which I don't know that they've got, really the bullets that they can make that type of jump right now, given, how well they played last year. They don't have a great pick. So I think it's problematic, for the Steelers. And if it is not Aaron Rodgers, we will be moving these guys down even further. And I'm with you, man. Honestly, I would rather take Marvin Harrison Jr. right now. I get it. He didn't do what everybody wanted him to do in year 1. Well, maybe we just had really freaking stupid expectations, guys. And we saw the Malik Neighbors come out and do great. Brian Thomas Jr., finished the season like a high-end wide receiver 1. So that's also sitting there, and that's what we're thinking of. But Marvin Harrison Jr., it doesn't change the fact that he was still a really good prospect, Ian, and he had a pretty good rookie year. It just wasn't an elite rookie year compared to some of these other guys. But I just feel like, with the Cardinals, I've got a better shot of thinking Kyler could actually do something and just feed him and McBride together versus what I'm facing right now in Pittsburgh. So yeah, I'm totally on the same page as you. I think DK is definitely outside the top 24, and he's in that boom bust territory. Chris Olave, man. Chris Olave, if he could just stay healthy, I'd rather have him than DK. Sorry, I know I'm just like going off on a tangent here.
No, I'm with you, man. Give me Olave as well. And definitely give me Mr. Davante Adams, who went ahead and took his talents back to Los Angeles, signing with the Rams on a 2-year, $46 million deal. That $23 million per year valuation is tied with Calvin Ridley for the 17th most annual dollars at the position. So hopefully being in the same locker room with Jimmy Garoppolo will be okay. Adams hopefully, has enough money to get past that hate. And certainly we'll be looking at the real QB1, obviously, in Matthew Stafford, one of the greatest, wide receiver whisperers of his generation and probably all time, I think we can say at this point. So I've seen some takes out there, Dwayne, where people are like, why would the Rams go ahead and, release Cooper Kupp, which, by the way, they are expecting to do on Wednesday, barring a last-second trade. Why would they substitute one, older wide receiver for another one in Davante Adams? And I think the answer is that in the year 2025, and honestly, most of the past years as well, Davante Adams is a lot better than Cooper Kupp.
Exactly. Kendall and I talked about this on the immediate breakdown last night on the Fantasy Live channel over on YouTube, and that was kind of one of the I don't want to say it's subtle. It's not subtle. Like it's like right there in your face. The Rams are telling us Cooper Kupp is done. That's what they're saying. They are willing to sign another player of equal age that does not know their system, and they're willing to pay him, and they're going to cut Cooper Kupp, and actually it's going to cost them some money to do that. So I think this tells us where they are on Kupp at this point in his career, and it also says a lot about Davante Adams because they're getting rid of an older wide receiver, but they were willing to sign him. It's another situation, though, where there's a lot of duplicity between what Puka Nacua does and what Davante Adams does as far as like their average depth of target, the areas of the field. Obviously, Puka's going to get the stuff at the line of scrimmage because we all know Puka Nacua is really a running back, like playing wide receiver. You give him those throws, man, at the line of scrimmage. The dude's an absolute beast. Not on like Debo level, but really surprising how good Puka is with the ball in his hands around the line of scrimmage. But if you look at Davante Adams, I mean, is he going to slide into the slot? Will he really be playing that role that Cooper Kupp did leave behind? I think the question becomes, Ian, like, can we support two of these guys? I do think we feel good about Matthew Stafford, and I think we have seen in the past when Cooper Kupp actually was really performing well, it can be one of these offenses where it can be 60-65% of the targets just going through two guys. And so I don't want to overreact to this. I think there's a cap now that wasn't on Puka Nacua like just a couple days ago when we knew that Matthew Stafford was coming back and they didn't have Davante Adams yet. But I think you just want to be careful and not overreact too much. I think if folks want to slide Puka Nacua down like 2 or 3 spots, in their wide receiver rankings, I think that's fine. But it would be hard to go much further than that. But my question to you is like, where are you moving Davante Adams? Because like you mentioned, the dude was still balling last year, earning targets. It turns out that the 2 years before was really where he had a downgrade. It was just bad quarterback play. That's really all it was. That's what was holding him down. So where are you moving Adams?
I can't get him into that top 10 area, but he's firmly in that longer mix we were talking about. And once you start, looking at the individual names, like, all right, Jackson Smith and the Jigba and Lab McConkey, we'll see what kind of competition gets added there. But I think, you go with the youngsters. They've already proven they're capable of producing at this high level. Let's not overthink that. But again, after that, Dwayne, we're starting to look at guys like DJ Moore, Mike Evans, Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins, guys that are also facing some target competition or have bigger quarterback concerns to even worry about than what Davante is dealing with. So you mentioned some of the condensed target shares we've seen before. I mean, between Cooper Kupp and yes, even DeMarcus Robinson leaving, that's over 160 vacated targets right there. And the fact we know Tutu Atwell, who got that, $11 million deal, is going to be the wide receiver 3. I mean, that's an ideal wide receiver 3 to have for you, like not to worry about them overly eating into your guys' target share, okay? All due respect to Tutu and everything, but he's going to be more of that field stretching specialist, running a lot of gassers more times than not. I think Puka and Davante are going to have a chance to simultaneously eat. I'm with you. I'm not adjusting Puka's ranking. He's still my wide receiver 4. I think the days of, considering, hey, maybe I could bump him ahead of CeeDee Lamb or getting him into that top tier, those are over. I think you could start comparing him a bit closer to, neighbors, BTJ. So, Puka, same ranking, maybe down a tier. But Davante, man, Hey, I'm not going to worry about that ghost of Allen Robinson, okay? That was a messed up year. I get it. But again, not in the same class as Davante Adams. I still think there's plenty of juice here, man.
Yeah, I think Puka goes into the tier now with Nico, Amon-Ra, and you probably squeeze Brian Thomas Jr. into that tier, given the run that he's had this offseason. Cool. That's a group of guys. I like all of them, but I am with you on Davante Adams as well. Like, again, going back to this list of names, I will take Davante Adams over DJ Moore, like all day. I'm taking him over Xavier Worthy, taking him over Devonta Smith. What about Terry McLaurin?
Yeah, give me Devonta.
Yeah. And so I think he's right there in that mix. I think you've got, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Terry McLaurin, Davante Adams is probably in there, but I'm taking him over Garrett Wilson and DJ Moore. So right now, I'm sure his ADP is going to be moving really quickly, but he's wide receiver 27 on Underdog. And a lot of that was uncertainty of where would he land, right? Or would if he ended up staying with the Jets, who would they get at quarterback? So there was a lot of uncertainty with him. But now that we know he's going to get to play with a quarterback that we like and an offense with Sean McVay, who absolutely maximizes his wide receivers, yeah, I think mid-range wide receiver 2 is about as low as you can go with Adams.
Matthew Stafford, man, taking Aaron Rodgers' hopeful job and then his BFF in a matter of like a week out here, getting Rodgers back for all those Packers-Lions beatdowns over the years, perhaps. But we got some more wide receiver goodness to break down, guys. Quickly, though, a word from our friends over at Bud Light.
Hey, you're not actually allowed to drink in a beer commercial?
Since when?
You gotta wait till it's done. Oh,
5,
4, 3, 2, 1.
Obviously, helped rewrite some of the sort of wide receiver contracts with his big deal in Jacksonville a few years ago. Was supposedly about to be released, but then the Texans decided to give up a 7th-round pick for him instead. So we do now have CJ Stroud with the new number 2 target, again with Stephon Diggs still sitting in free agency, and Tank Dell tentatively not really expecting to play in the 2025 season as he recovers from that brutal, again, lower leg injury. So, Dwain, again, Nico Collins, obviously the number 1 wide receiver in Houston, but man, if you had to kind of look around the league and try to find a spot to really get excited about Christian Kirk, maybe having a bit of a renaissance, Houston would have been on the short list.
Yeah, I mean, Kirk is a guy that lands in a spot where we know they need him, right? So that's always a good thing. We've got Nico there as the undisputed wide receiver 1, but with Tank Dell, to your point, in a situation where you get injured late in the year, who knows what we're going to see from him? We could see a situation where Christian Kirk is really the wide receiver 2 for most of the season, here in Jacksonville, or sorry, not in Jacksonville, in Houston. And we've got CJ Stroud really just one season removed from us thinking that, wow, like, is this guy going to potentially be someone that could challenge Patrick Mahomes and some of these other great quarterbacks in the AFC. Now, it didn't obviously go the way that we had hoped it would go for Stroud last year, but now kind of looking at that, kind of hindsight's always 20/20, but a lot of this does seem to be pointing back towards the offensive coordinator and some of the dysfunction that was going on within the building, is at least the offensive building. So hopefully moving on, get a new offensive coordinator in there. We do kind of get things going again for CJ Stroud. I will say this on Christian Kirk, like, he's never really been like, he's never been wide receiver 1 material. He's had a couple seasons where he worked his way into that wide receiver 2 conversation, but he's a really good wide receiver 3. Like, if you look at his yards per route run, targets per route run, all the underlying metrics, we try to line up and basically say, hey, do they justify their fantasy points, or are they in alignment with their fantasy points per game? He's a wide receiver 3. And so you put him in an offense, and if you do get CJ Stroud going, I think he could definitely surprise, given like where he's going right now in fantasy drafts. He's essentially forgotten. There's going to be a big adjustment on him, but I could see him being a guy that's a wide receiver 4, maybe a wide receiver 5 as far as where he ends up getting drafted. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if he ends up being a wide receiver 3 in fantasy. This is a guy that's not just a slot that's going to work, these underneath kind of routes. He is a vertical slot. And if you guys have watched CJ Stroud play at all, that's what he wants to do. CJ is always looking to buy that extra beat of time to push the ball down the field vertically and to really try to hit the big play. So I do think Christian Kirk is a fit for what CJ Stroud likes to do in the plays he's looking to hit.
I'm with you in terms of not going to be someone I'm going to be lining up to rank inside my top 30 or anything. But if you want to try to find, this year's version of like a Darnell Mooney type, that wide receiver 5-ish price guy who all of a sudden finds himself in an offense putting up some passing yards and, really isn't a secondary option to worry about, Christian Kirk perhaps could be that guy, pal. So it's going to be 29 next November. But man, even before having that injury, you were still seeing that familiar quickness. I know I made a sheesh video for him like October showing 3 or 4 instances where, only got 1 foot down in bounds, or maybe had a bad pass from Trevor Lawrence. I know the numbers weren't quite there, but again, did look like his usual baller self out of that slot. So we'll see what else Houston does. I mean, honestly, they just really haven't addressed the wide receiver position a ton in the drafts over the years, actually since 2016. Nico, Mechie, and Tank Dell, those are the only 3 top 100 wide receivers drafted. So it's good they added Kirk. Not quite sure what they're doing otherwise, Dwayne. They went ahead and traded Laramie Tunzel, the Washington Commanders.
Yeah.
Save some cap room. That's cool. Got some draft picks, but I don't know. Wasn't exactly watching Houston last year going, man, if only we took away some of these offensive linemen, that'd be, great for CJ Stroud. So I know Texans fans, there are a lot of false starts penalties and all that. And okay, you save some money, maybe locker room stuff I don't know about. But again, just you have your quarterback still on that rookie contract. Let's try to protect CJ Stroud a bit more, because it really did seem like he got spooked for, certain stretches of last season. Not so sure, again, subtracting pieces overly going to help there. So overall, good news for Christian Kirk. But Dwayne, perhaps the best news low key was for one Aaron Jones, who isn't going anywhere, but as we've seen in free agency over the years, sometimes that is the best. So he is returned to Minnesota on a 2-year, $20 million deal with $13 million guaranteed. And I know last year, Dwayne, we'd sit here every Tuesday breaking down the utilization report, and there were stretches where Aaron Jones was legit looking at a workhorse 3-down role.
Yeah, for sure. And then a little injury or whatever would pop up, and it's like it would go away. And then he'd start to get it back, and like another injury would pop up. It kind of reminded me of a few years back when TJ Hawkinson every week was like at that 80-85% route participation. We're like, it's going to happen, guys. And then it never really did. Like he would be fine, but he never broke out. That's what Aaron Jones did to the utilization report this last year. A little bit of a drop off, Ian, as far as efficiency goes. 3.0 yards after contact this last season. That was his lowest mark since 2019. You look at his missed tackles forced per attempt, that was at 18%. That was his lowest mark since we saw in 2021. Well, 2021 actually, was his best year, 25%. The year before that, 23. But the last 2 years, he's been at that 18% mark. So right around the league average. The average is 17%. Then you look at the explosive rush rate. That's also down. The last 2 years, 10% of his carries went for 10 plus yards. In the 2 years before that, we saw 14% and 13%. So I think a little bit of the edge to Aaron Jones's game is gone, but to your point, he's still playing an offense with Kevin O'Connell. He's going to have an opportunity to be the lead guy again. And we've talked about this many times. Even though those efficiency stats are usually pretty sticky to the player, and they can tend to tip us off a little bit when a player might be taking a downturn, it's not like it means the end of the world for them, because the volume is still really the biggest indicator of what's going to happen the next year. He's staying with the same team. So I think we are looking at a scenario where Aaron Jones probably gets 55-60% of the rushing attempts, maybe gets a 10 to 12% target share, and you're going to feel pretty good about him in fantasy. And he could easily be a top 12 running back. That's not the way we're going to draft him, but there are many other runouts of last season. You get rid of some of the injuries and things like that, and we would have felt a lot better about Aaron Jones than what we did at the end of the year.
Not exactly expecting, JJ McCarthy to take over and all of a sudden be asked to, engineer his top 10 passing offense in terms of the volume. So could be plenty of work on the ground. And yes, there still is time for the Vikings to perhaps draft a running back, but I'm looking at their picks right now, Dwayne. They have the 24th overall pick in the first round. I'd be pretty surprised if they go again late round 1 on a running back after giving Jones that sort of money. They don't pick again until the 97th overall selection in the 3rd round. And then they don't even have a pick in the 4th round. So I know we're going to have some comp picks, come through for these guys. So maybe they do get a couple extra selections there. But man, unless they want to use that 97th overall pick on one of these, just again, noted deep running back class sort of players, maybe we do see Aaron Jones returning with only a Cam Akers sort of guy behind him on the depth chart. So as Dwayne said, it really was fluctuating throughout the season, but we've seen these veteran running backs, really have a renaissance last year at least. Maybe that was just, the beginning, Dwayne.
Yeah, I mean, look, Aaron Jones, he still put up, 14.6 fantasy points per game last year. And I would say that, while the utilization was solid, again, he didn't run pure. It wouldn't surprise me if he's closer to 16 this season. But again, a lot of it will come down to ADP. You're not having to break the bank to go get Aaron Jones. We'll see how much it moves with him returning to the Vikings. And how dare you suggest that we're not just going to see an offense that's going to throw for 6,000 yards? Do you not follow Thor Nystrom on Twitter? I mean, come on, Ian. JJ is the second coming of, I don't know who he's the second coming of, but something really good. So Thor's definitely a believer in McCarthy, but I am with you. We could see a little bit more involved, a little bit more run game here from this team. It isn't like Kevin O'Connell. If you go back and look at his history, it's not like he's always just been the super pass heavy offense. He is willing to run the ball when he needs to. And to your point, yes, after last year, I think we have seen that, yes, just sometimes these older guys can still get it done.
Certainly knows how to put up plenty of points, Kevin O'Connell, that is. So we're going to be happy about Jones, McCarthy, Addison, Jettis, Hawkinson, the whole lot ahead of 2025, because Lord knows if we aren't, Thor's going to let us hear about it. So hope you guys enjoyed those breakdowns. We have plenty more ready throughout the rest of the week, guys. We'll be back tomorrow talking about things like Jalen Warren, Mike Gesicki, Josh Palmer getting paid by the Bills, all that and much, much more that I'm sure will break between now and then. In the meantime, make sure you check out our updating free agency tracker over at fantasylife.com. I'm also churning out plenty of hit pieces on the bigger signings along the way. So appreciate you guys tuning in. As always, for Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for checking out the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.